Looking at an advertisement, we might want to look at the consistent patterns for how a message is delivered by any given organization about their particular brand. So this not only includes advertising, but the way that they post as well when it comes to any kind of promotion of their brand, whether it be through advertising or public relations as well. Hope y'all are doing well today. We are going to be going over content analysis, the basics of how to conduct these. I will mention that these are going to be solely on y'all in terms of how you address each one of these coding categories as a whole, and how to take something like this, which is the Anna Bananas Facebook page, and be able to utilize it in such a way to look at how an organization posts, and also how to quantify that, because this is another major facet within content analysis. So first and foremost, we have to define content analysis as a whole. So what is it? Content analysis basically looks at how we look at patterns through specific mediated communication. So in this case, it is through the Anna Banana website. That is our phenomena that we are trying to study. So our goal is to look at consistency within messaging for your brand. So in order to do that and be able to do that, we have to check out a couple of posts that Anna Banana makes herself, for example. So as you see, you scroll down and you start to look at some of the way that they post and they communicate their particular message. Now, since this is an apparel line, one of the things that we'll usually note is kind of visual aesthetic. They are trying to focus on the actual clothing of the product. But there are also other themes as well, like social themes, that come up pretty frequently. As you can see, that there are usually multiple people within their post, people having fun. The Zoom chat would be a good example as well. The reason I'm bringing this up is it's very important to say, what is the facet of what makes this brand? What is the overall message? What is the overall goal? And with an example like Anna Bananas, they're basically saying, they have a lot of ways of saying, we not only want to feature our clothing line, which is the primary selling point here for apparel, but we're also trying to communicate a community here in Boone. So it's a very important thing to say, what is the message and what brings people to our business. So one thing that we will look at when it comes to talking about content analysis and how to analyze for it, we have to start off with our coding sheet. So this is an example of what a coding sheet looks like. Note that you have a coder, which is anybody that is the person going through these messages. So usually you will have two people at minimum going through each one of these posts. Now, for a class assignment, I'm not really going to require intercoder reliability, although you should have that, which just basically means that your coding is consistent between two or more people, basically making sure that there's good validity between the way that are coding. So in other words, the message is understood and the coding sheet is well written. So again, you will identify yourself through a coder, and in this case, it'll be numeric. So whether that coder is 1 or 2 or 3, whatever it may be. You'll notice here that the majority of content analysis is either nominal or ratio data. So in this case, right here, for instance, this is all ratio data, which means that it's a count, and it also means that you can have 0. So for instance, amount of post likes and post comments, you might not have any of them. So that is a case where we might sit there and say, this is the count that we're looking for. However, it may have 0, and that's fine, because that's how ratio data works. So again, one thing we are doing is kind of promoting this through Facebook exclusively in this coding sheet here. So you see here things that are synonymous with metrics of Facebook. So this way you don't actually have to have the data from Facebook themselves. You can actually look at it from the things that they post in the audience reaction of it. which isn't as critical for data. It's much better to have your impressions and engagement rate, but this actually works pretty darn well as well. It can help you write up a smart plan, for instance, if you're going in blind to this organization's metrics. So these are really important to be able to utilize. It's also worth noting that you can use big data for this, but if you're not familiar with like using programs like Python, this can be extremely difficult, and you have to make sure that the computer knows how it's supposed to be operating within word association, which can be a bit of a challenge. So this is an easy way, this is a manageable way to be able to go into each particular post and code for them. So you can see this is just an example of what this might look like. Now yours may look different, as you might be looking for different things within your coding and the phenomena here. But again, this is just an example that you might use. So again, all of these right here are what we call ratio data when it comes to the coder, product ID, and that will really just depend on what your product is. So if it's just Anna Bananas, for instance, or the Horton Hotel, for those two clients, then you honestly can just ignore that one, because that one in particular had to do with two different product ideas that were being compared in this case. So if it's just one product, all you would have to do is type one or not use it at all. Post date is very important because now we can utilize the fact that we can say how many times do they post. So we see February 2nd, we see January 29th. So it seems like it's every couple days and or weeks, as this is January 14th, January 10th. So we can determine that the amount of posting when it comes to writing our smart plan, for instance, if you were to do that, would be kind of indicating that there aren't a lot of posts out there. In fact, there are usually only a couple per week. And that may be fine, but at the same time, it may be something that you want to increase that. So that's just a small observation right there by understanding a post date. Then you have amount of post comments and post likes. It's really simple. Go into each one and see how many likes, which you have 5 overall, and 1 comment. So again, super easy to do. Then you have hearts, ha-has, wows, sads, angries. I didn't put care on there. This is an older coding sheet, but you can have that in there as well as putting the care in there. In fact, I would encourage you to do so for the metrics of Facebook. These are also counts as well. It just made it a little bit more easily managed by just putting them in this little matrix right here. So, but being able to put the numeric value of each one of these down is very important. I am going to take a quick stop, hold up what I'm trying to say, and mention, for the sake of being able to, you're not taking all this information and utilizing it within this coding sheet. You will have 3 things up at all times when you're trying to code. 1 is your phenomena, which in this case is your Facebook page. 2 is going to be your coding sheet, which is shown right here. And 3 is going to be your Excel sheet, which has all the information you might need. So again, you have coder ID, product ID, amount of post comments. These are all things that you will be utilizing here. It's important to remember, as someone who's a data specialist, that there are 2 main things that I want you to think about when you're entering data in here. 1, remember that these are counts. And so whenever my computer starts to work, there we go. These are the kind of things that we look at the amount here. So in this case, we're kind of starting to talk about the 50 posts that are due for the assignment. And I'm going to kind of drag down and say, okay, this is 45, but you'll get my premise here. Is that you'll look through these posts as numeric value. And then looking at post date, each one of these you're going to look at the phenomena, again, the Facebook page, and just link everything up numerically here. Now, dates are going to be a little bit tricky because when you enter dates in Excel, they like automatically function. It's part of their auto formatting. So that can be a little bit tricky. But the big thing is this. 1, everything should be in numeric value. So don't put up any words. in this case. So if you look at things like presence, for instance, this is the kind of, or excuse me, Taylor's 6-segment strategy wheel, which is labeled up here. You'll get into understanding a little bit here that within Taylor's 6-segment strategy wheel, there will be 6 categories. The temptation is to actually write it in there, whether it be social or sensory, whatever it may be. Temptation is to write it, but we're not doing that here. We're actually going back to our coding sheet and saying rational, acute need, routine, ego, social, sensory. What is the numeric value associated with that particular one? So you see rational is 1, acute need is 2, and you will enter them in accordingly. So as you're going along in terms of coding, you will add those numbers as you see that are defined. So in other words, if I go through, as I've noticed a couple posts on Anna Bananas are what we would consider social. Persuaded statement, pieces to show off other people. So again, this kind of community building means that when I code for this particular one, this is a social persuasive message, and therefore should be coded as 5 based on that particular post. So again, it takes a little bit getting used to, but it is something that has to be done in a way that you're kind of just going through each post for each one within the coding sheet here. Moreover, another thing that you should be thinking about is that it always should be 1 numeric value per cell. I cannot stress this enough. So what I'm trying to say here is I don't want to see anything that looks like this. So if you post something that looks like this is going to be extremely difficult for somebody who is coding to be able to actually go into data analytics on the back half in terms of counting frequencies. So I can count frequencies really easily if it's just 1, 2, 3, and then, we can talk about data interpretation later. But when I have all these numbers up here, this is clean. This makes it very easy to go in and say, what does my count look like? What are my frequencies look like for this one in particular? When we put either words or multiple numbers, that's where it gets tricky. So anytime you're doing this, make sure that it has 1 number per cell. And again, number per cell. Can't stress that enough. Okay. So as I've mentioned before, you're usually either using ratio data, which is up here, or nominal data. So in this case, we start to see a little bit about nominal data. One thing I usually like to do is if there is a segment that isn't featured within the post, then we can either mark it present or absent. So in this case, if none of the 6-segment strategy wheel areas are present, then what I can do is I can code no. And then I can just ignore this one right here. So for number 8, I would code number 2 for no. And then when I go to Taylor's 6-segment strategy wheel, I just ignore it. I can put it like a 0, for instance. Now, a question that might come up is, Dr. Daniel, can I put an other? So like, can I put a number 7 here next to 6-segment strategy wheel and say, it's not rational, acute need, routine, ego, social, or sensory. It's kind of something else. So I want to label it as other. And you can hypothetically, not for this one, mainly because this is considered by prior literature about this is exactly how the model looks like. So you can't just go and change the model because it's not yours to change. So usually if nothing fits here, it would be absence. Now, there are ways that we can talk about in terms of qualitative coding where you can add an other and then see if there's anything that fits outside of these 6 things, for instance, we can actually create another and see if there are any patterns that exist. So, which is called open coding. Now, depending on what school you're on, with quantitative researchers don't really like open coding. They prefer you to stick to your coding sheet, whereas qualitative researchers say, no, the data should speak for itself. You shouldn't confine yourself to just the theory here in this case. So I don't really want you to worry about that so much, at least not for this one. So again, if it's present, then we look down here. So we'll code 1, and then we'll look in the 6-segment strategy wheel and see which one existed. So rational, I'm going to go over these real quick. Rational are primarily persuaded by rational attempts, pragmatic buying motive. So it's a sale, for instance, a BOGO, for instance. We have lower prices than other stores, so for instance. Those are rational ideas, right? Acute need would be the persuaded to have a need for something, which means it could be a sale, for instance. Now, it is important to say that the word choice for a sale could be rational or acute need. Where it comes in is if it's acute need, it would be like come in now. Supplies are limited, for instance. That creates that charge. But again, it is the need to have something immediately. You're probably not going to find a lot of that for Horton Hotel or Anna Bananas. You will probably see rational a little bit. Routine, you might see that with Anna Bananas, probably not so much with Horton Hotel. But routine is basically, is it in your daily cycle? So, purchasing a clothing is routine. So they might have some persuasive messaging that indicate that you are dealing with a routine strategy. Typically, you would find this for things like laundry detergent or toilet paper. They are routine. Now again, toilet paper, for instance, could be acute need as well, depending on the severity of you need it. But routine basically says this is always going to go on your grocery run, as an example. The other side of it kind of looks into identity and social needs. So this is all pragmatic right here. These 1, 2, 3. These in particular, 4, 5, 6, ego, social, sensory. Ego would look at, it's a product that indicates who I am, for instance. So when I say that, it may be like, it kind of forms my identity. So if you're a Mac person, right? Or if you're a PC gamer, or you're a PlayStation person, they had a whole South Park episode, for goodness sake, about that. Of, this is the game system that is kind of defined by myself here. So that's an ego-related message strategy. So in this case, promoting a hotel for a certain clientele, as this would be your again, ego sounds like such a bad word, but it just means identity. Same with Anna Bananas in terms of the clothing can really be defined by your style in particular. Social, which you will probably see quite a bit with both of your clients, persuaded by statements, pieces to show off to other people. This is going to be looking at, community. This will be looking at the people that work there. For instance, tabletop board games are usually advertised by social, just showing that people are having a lot of fun. Budweiser does that a lot. A lot of light beers show that people are having a really good time. They're not going to show how great it tastes, which is sensory. They're going to show that a lot of people are having fun while they drink. Which, again, to some extent, they have to monitor when it comes to FTC regulations. But you get what I mean here. But again, social goes a long way. Pizza commercials do this a lot, where they bring in and say, eating pizza together just feels better, right? And it's something that a lot of people do when it comes to COVID as well, is saying it's not necessarily that you have social appeals, is that you're lacking them and we want them. And then sensory is anything that is persuaded by happy sensations about the senses, or in vice versa, avoiding bad ones. So like hefty, or what is it, Glad, one of those two for trash bags will show a really stinky trash bag, which is a sensory way of saying, oh my gosh, my olfactory senses are going off the charts because this smells so damn bad. So this is the kind of thing where smell would be a good indication for being able to show that within your products. My guess is that you're going to find a lot of sensory appeals when it comes to either clothing or just the beauty of Boone when it comes to the Horton Hotel. The aesthetics within the Horton Hotel are visually appealing. So I would imagine that you will see things like rational, maybe routine, potentially acute need, ego, any of these honestly, but Sensory is probably going to be a big one. Rational is probably going to be a big one that you see. The key is first and foremost when you're going through these posts. So anytime that you go through your Facebook post, don't mind Tanjiro, anytime you're going through these posts here, you want to look at it and don't force the definition. This is what a lot of people do, and it's something that has kind of big ramifications for doing this incorrectly, is that they'll go in and they say, okay, well, it's kind of between these two, but, you know, I'm feeling like, every time you go into I'm feeling like, it can spell for a little bit of trouble. Stick to the definitions here. Of the text that you see, is it pragmatic? Is it through need? Is it repeated desire? Is it I am me? Is it show off to other people? Or is it through senses? You know, these are the 6 that I want you to pay attention to. I am more than happy to answer questions about this. I know this is going to be a lot to take in, even if it's just a little bit of information here. But again, every time that you go in here, you're going to enter in from the post on your Excel sheet. So is it presence? Yes. So I'm going to enter in a 1, and which type it is, we'll say it's sensory. Boom, I'll hit number 6 here. Go to the next post, for instance, and say, is there a presence? No, this time there's not. So I'm going to write a 2, and then the next one I'll write a 0. So again, it really just takes getting into a rhythm. It's not hard. It just kind of takes into getting in a rhythm and going by the definitions that you see. Again, everything with content analysis is fueled by definitions, and I'll put up the 6-segment strategy wheel as well to give a better indication of this. Now, these in particular, 10 through 13, were actually written by one of my classes. So these aren't necessarily things that you're going to see within literature. It was just something that I wanted them to get practice in terms of not only writing what a nominal category would look like, but how to define it as well. So in this case, they came up with promotional, new product, promoting action, branding and social, others, etc. So one thing that they didn't do that I would have recommended is if they hit number 5 and they didn't see it was promotional, new product, promoting action, branding or social, and it was an other, then I would tell them to add another coding category to say, if other, what is it? Okay, this is the one time where I will allow you to write text in your Excel spreadsheet. If you have to write a description or write one word, then other blank is the place to do it. But if you're finding that there are patterns within it, and usually brands are because they want to be consistent with their messaging, you can write that down. And if it comes over a number of times, then you can quantitatively assign it. So, you know, I'm finding something that differs from here. I'm not 100% sure what I would say besides these 4 just off the top of my head. But it is something that I would say other. I'm going to write a bunch down. And then if it's a common theme, I can numerically assign it. And again, if I'm doing open coding, I can actually add it to this particular type here for the type of post, hypothetically. The last one was presence of seasonal. In this case, we decided to do Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween, Easter, Valentine's Day, or other. This will depend on you. I've already seen one post for Hannah Bananas that was a Thanksgiving post, for instance. So you could hypothetically do that. The reason that we did that was for this one in particular, we wanted to see if our client was doing seasonal advertising to really promote their brand, in this case within the fall. So there was kind of an area of being able to understand this from a seasonal perspective here. So again, these are all things that, again, will take some time to be able to do. I'll mention this one more time. Any one of these up here, for instance, are counts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, counting those from zero, and it can be up to anything. So if you got 347 likes, that's fine. You want to be honest with what you see. But again, they're counts to infinity, 0 to infinity. depending on what it might be, whatever you see, in other words. These are nominal and they have a set range. It can only be 1 through 6. So please keep that in mind. Anytime that you're doing these, I would really encourage, if you have the space for it. If you don't, then there's no argument here. If you have the space for it, at least have somewhere that you might be able to have 2 monitors, because having all this visual information, I could show you here, it could get a little messy and you're trying to move windows around and so forth. Whereas I've got 3 screens on my computer here for my office, and I actually will break them up into saying, here's my content in the middle, and my coding is on my right, and then my actual Excel is on my left, or I mix it up in any sort of way here. The key is you will begin to memorize what these look like right here. So it won't be any big deal to say, I know that number 1 is rational here. I know that number 3 is routine. I know that number 5 is social. So I can come in here, go through the Facebook pages, and I say, oh, there's a rational argument. I can come in here. I can just use the Excel file and, boom, rational, number 1. Now we can talk about data collection and being able to interpret it a little later, but this is the instance of just kind of going through content analysis. Again, the reason that it's so important is to find patterns. We've done this for things like news, going through news articles. We've gone through it for Twitter. We've gone through a number of different things with advertising, in terms of message strategy, as you see here. All of those things are very important to recognize those patterns and how a message is communicated by a certain organization, by a certain collective of people, etc. But they are important, and it is important research to be able to utilize as you're going through and being able to talk about the statistics here. So you can go to Anna Bananas and say, hey, these are the messages that I found. And with that, I can look at how many reactions are you getting. So, honestly, not much. And they might be from just employees of the organization themselves. So this is not only the post, but we can talk about the engagement post of it as well to determine what can we be doing better? What can we be doing to get more people to follow us and more people to react to our messaging here? So that's the main thing I wanted to go over. I hope this makes sense. I know it's a lot of information, but I hope it's helpful information in terms of how to do a content analysis. So please, please, please email me with any questions you might have. I will be more than happy to talk with you in class about kind of the nitty gritty while we're doing it. It helps to get like 1 or 2 posts down before you get into a rhythm. But again, those are all facets for actually doing it. So again, questions if you have them. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you next week. Thank you.